Welcome to Dreamstate Stories. These stories are here to transport you to a world just beyond reality, whether you're on the move or settling in somewhere quiet. Allow your imagination to play. Lean into the what if. Let yourself remember what it felt like to believe in things you couldn't quite explain. We're glad you're here. The lights that listen. In winter, Iceland belongs mostly to the dark. The sun arrives late and leaves early, and in the deep months it barely clears the horizon before the night reclaims everything. What remains is a particular quality of silence that people who have never experienced would struggle to describe. Not the silence of absence, but of presence. The land is full of something. The sea is full of something. The sky above the coast is also full of something. The coastline in winter is black rock and white snow and the cold gray of water that has never been warm. The fishing towns along the shore go quiet early. Lights appear in small windows. Somewhere beneath the surface of the ocean, far out and deep down, humpback whales are moving through water so cold it is almost solid. And above all of it, on the clearest nights, the aurora begins. It arrives without announcement. One moment the sky is simply dark and full of stars. And the next, there is something else, a shimmer, a slow green breath along the horizon, rising and folding and spreading until the whole vault of the sky is alive with it. It moves the way no weather moves, purposefully, fluidly, as if it knows what it is doing, as if it is saying something. Most people seeing it for the first time go quiet. This is not a coincidence. The humpback whales that move through these waters in winter are following patterns that go back further than recorded history. Their migration routes are not random. They are precise, repeated, encoded in the animal's memory in ways that no one fully understands. They sing as they travel, long, complex sequences of sound that carry for miles through the ocean, changing over seasons, passed between individuals and pods in ways that have no simple biological explanation. Scientists have been studying humpback song for decades. The more carefully they study it, the less certain they become. It is clearly communication, but what it communicates remains genuinely unknown. His name is Kenji, and he is 43 years old. He has spent the last 15 years studying the vocal structures of marine mammals at a university on the southern coast of Japan. He is very good at his work. This is not the reason he left. He left because he had spent 15 years in a world that seemed to grow louder every year. Notifications and alerts, and the particular relentlessness of modern academic life, where the expectation is constant output and constant connection, and the quiet spaces where actual thinking happens are slowly compressed until they nearly disappear. He had found himself, in the last few years of it, sitting in rooms full of people and feeling a kind of noise inside himself that had nothing to do with what was happening around him. A low, persistent frequency of overwhelm, an inability to hear his own thoughts clearly. He had tried various remedies. None of them were Iceland. Iceland was a colleague's suggestion. A small marine research team operating out of a coastal station, studying unusual changes in humpback whale behavior in the waters along the northwestern coast. The team was short-staffed. The work was nocturnal, much of it conducted from a small research vessel in conditions that most people would find difficult. The nearest city was hours away. The winters were long and dark and cold. Kenji said yes before the colleague had finished describing the position. He arrived in November, when the dark was already well established, and the aurora had been active for weeks. The research station was smaller than he had imagined, a converted fishing facility with insulated walls, equipment he recognized, and some he didn't, and two colleagues who were polite and competent and did not talk much more than necessary. This suited him exactly. The first night he went out on the research vessel, he stood at the bow in the cold and listened to the ocean and felt, for the first time in years, the noise inside him begin to quiet. Not disappear, not yet, but soften, like a signal that had been competing with interference, finally coming through clean. He stood there for a long time, long after the others had gone inside. Above him, the aurora shifted through the sky in long, slow curtains of green. He did not analyze it. He simply watched. The research team's work centered on a behavioral anomaly that had first been recorded the previous winter. Humpback whales in this region had always followed predictable migration patterns, arriving in late autumn, feeding through the darker months, moving on in early spring. But in recent seasons, something had changed. A significant number of whales were not passing through as expected. They were staying, gathering in locations that had no historical precedent, forming loose aggregations in water that offered no obvious feeding advantage, and vocalizing almost continuously through the night. This was unusual enough to generate funding and a small team. Kenji's expertise was in vocal pattern analysis. His task was to record, catalog, and attempt to decode the structural changes in the whales' songs. Were these new sequences? Were they geographically or socially specific? Did they carry information of the kind that could be mapped to known cetacean communication frameworks? He approached it the way he had always approached his work, methodically, rigorously, and with the full apparatus of linguistic and acoustic analysis at his disposal. He set up his equipment. He ran his recordings. He began building his models. And then, one night, looking up from his laptop screen and out through the vessel's window, he noticed something. The whale had been singing for 40 minutes, a long, slowly evolving sequence he had been recording and processing in real time. And the aurora above the water had been active throughout, which was not unusual. But in the last few minutes of the sequence, something had changed in the lights. A particular band of green had contracted, brightened, and then spread outward in a shape that seemed, and he was aware of how this sounded even to himself, almost responsive, like a ripple moving outward from a point, like an answer. He rewound the recording. He watched the lights. He said nothing to the others. He spent the following 2 weeks building a comparison model he had no name for yet. He mapped the spectral signatures of the whale songs: frequency, rhythm, duration, the particular intervals between phrases he had always found the most linguistically suggestive. He mapped them against footage of the aurora taken simultaneously from a fixed camera mounted at the station on shore. He wrote code to align the 2 data streams by timestamp, looking for correlations he told himself he would probably not find. He found them. They were not subtle. Once the model was built, the correspondence between specific vocal structures and aurora movement was consistent enough that he began to be able to predict it. Not perfectly, and not with the precision that any peer-reviewed paper would require, but enough. Enough that when the whale shifted into a particular ascending interval, he could watch the screen showing the aurora feed and wait, and the lights would move, contract or expand, or brighten in a concentrated band. He ran the analysis 17 times. The correlation held. He sat with this for a long time, not knowing how to frame it, not knowing where to put it in any intellectual structure he had ever been taught to trust. The whales were communicating. This he had always believed. The question he had spent his career asking was, with what? He had assumed the answer was each other. He presented his initial findings to the 2 colleagues on the team with the care of someone placing something fragile on a table. He showed them the correlation model. He showed them the 17 runs. He said nothing about what he thought it might mean, only what the data showed. They were quiet for a longer moment than he had expected. One of them asked whether the correlation could be electromagnetic, whether the whale songs were producing low-frequency vibrations that were affecting the ionospheric conditions responsible for the aurora display, whether there was a physical mechanism, a chain of cause and event that didn't require any stranger explanation. Kenji said it was possible. He had thought of it. He had run a preliminary analysis of the frequencies involved and found nothing conclusive either way. What he did not say was, "I don't think that's what this is." He wasn't ready to say that yet. There is a particular kind of intellectual crisis that doesn't feel like a crisis at all. It feels like a door opening. Kenji had spent his career working with the assumption that communication, all communication, was fundamentally structural. that it could be mapped, modeled, and eventually understood if the analysis was thorough enough. This was not a cynical assumption. It was a working faith. The faith that everything that could be said could, in principle, be heard. What his data was now suggesting was something his analytical frameworks did not have categories for. It was not that the whales were communicating with the aurora in the way that one animal communicates with another. It was not signaling in any sense he had a word for. It was something much more like, and he kept returning to this word, resonance. The way a struck tuning fork will cause another to vibrate without being touched. The way certain frequencies find each other across distance, not because they are aimed at one another, but because they share something essential. The whales were singing. The sky was singing back. And the more he sat with this idea, not trying to prove or disprove it, simply holding it, the more he felt something shift in him. The way ice shifts before it breaks, not noisily, just a quiet rearrangement of something that had been still for a very long time. He began finding moments to go out to the shoreline alone at night. Not to work, just to be there. He would stand on the black rock in the cold, his equipment back at the station, and listen to the ocean and watch the sky. On the nights when the aurora was active and the recordings confirmed the whales were singing below, he would simply try to hold both things at once. The sound moving through the water beneath him, and the light moving through the sky above him, and not try to explain the relationship between them, only feel it. It was the most scientifically irresponsible thing he had ever done. He found it completely necessary. Humpback whales have been on this planet for approximately 5 million years. The species in its present form has existed long enough to have been alive during periods of Earth's history that human civilization has barely any understanding of. They have survived multiple mass extinction events. They have watched, in whatever sense a whale watches, the slow drift of continents, the rise and fall of ice ages, the reorganization of ocean currents that human beings are only now beginning to measure. Their songs have been recorded, analyzed, and cataloged since the late 1960s. Every year, researchers find new complexity in them. They evolve in real time. A phrase or sequence that appears in one season's songs can spread across ocean basins within months, passed from whale to whale the way a melody passes between musicians who have never met but somehow know it. There is no scientific consensus on what the songs mean, or whether meaning is even the right concept. Kenji had always quietly believed that the lack of consensus came partly from the narrowness of the question. Researchers were looking for information transfer, the kind of meaning that language in the human sense carries, subject and object, statement and response, data moving from one party to another. But what if Humpback's song wasn't language in that sense at all? What if it was something closer to what music is? Not communication of facts, but participation in something, a shared state, a resonance, a way of saying, I am here, and the world is this, and I am part of it. And if the aurora was answering, not responding to a message, but resonating with a frequency, then perhaps the conversation was not between the whales and the sky. Perhaps the conversation was the planet talking to itself. He turned this thought over carefully for a long time before he trusted himself with it. It was not a scientific conclusion. He knew that. It was something else, a shift in framework, a willingness to consider that the thing he had been trained to study might be larger than the tools he had been given to study it with. This was not a comfortable thought for someone who had spent 15 years building those tools. But the data held. And the nights on the shoreline held. And something in him that had been closed for a long time was opening. And he decided to let it. He had arrived in Iceland trying to escape noise. What he found instead was a different kind of listening. The noise he had carried from his former life, the relentless frequency of a world that demanded constant response, had not simply stopped when he arrived on the island. It had faded gradually, like a signal weakening with distance, until one morning he realized he had gone several days without the particular tightness in his chest that he had come to think of as simply how he felt. It had not gone because he had solved anything. It had gone because he had stopped trying to. He thought about this in connection with the whales. The humpbacks in these waters were not, as far as he could determine, transmitting survival information or coordinating feeding or navigating. They were gathering in places with no feeding advantage, in patterns that served no obvious biological function, and singing continuously, elaborately, for hours, in the direction of a sky that moved in response. They were not doing it because it was useful. They were doing it because it was meaningful. There was a kind of intelligence in this that his years of academic training had given him no framework for. Because academic training is, by design, a framework for extracting and transferring knowledge. But what the whales were engaged in was not the transfer of knowledge. It was something more like the practice of belonging, a repeated, living affirmation of connection to the ocean, to the sky, to the planet they had inhabited for 5 million years, conducted in a frequency that the earth itself could hear and answer. Humanity had known how to do this once. Most cultures had, in one form or another, ritual, song, ceremony, the practice of standing in wild places and simply being a part of them rather than analyzing them. These things had not been abandoned because they stopped working. They had been abandoned because the pace of the world had made them feel unproductive. Kenji was not sure, standing on the black rock at the edge of the Atlantic with the aurora overhead and the whale songs in the water beneath him, that productivity was the correct measure for everything. He stopped trying to translate the lights. This was not a defeat. It felt more like the moment when you stop forcing a word you've been reaching for and let it come on its own. A deliberate release of the intellectual grip he had kept on the phenomenon, the constant attempt to reduce it to structure, to find the grammar in it, to make it yield a meaning he could file and reference and build upon. He still kept records. He still ran his analyses. The scientist in him had not gone anywhere, but he held the data more lightly now, with the understanding that the map he was drawing might be missing dimensions that his instruments couldn't measure. What he did instead of translating was simply attend. He attended to the sound beneath the water, the long, looping phrases of the Humpback song, the way certain sequences felt almost gravitational, pulling his awareness downward into the cold dark where the whales moved. He attended to the lights above, the way they responded not just in his data model, but in his body. A low vibration he felt before he saw the corresponding movement in the sky. He attended to the cold and the smell of the sea and the silence of the Icelandic night around him. A silence that was not empty, never empty, but full of the vast and patient presence of a world that had been in conversation with itself long before the first human being looked up and wondered what the lights were saying. Some evenings, walking back to the station along the coastal path, he thought about language, about what it is for, and what it cannot do. Language is the great human invention, the technology that made everything else possible, the means by which one mind reaches into another. He had dedicated his professional life to it, in the expanded sense that the whale song was always a question about the nature of language itself. Where does it begin? How far does it extend? What are the borders of the communicating world? He thought he was closer to an answer now than he had ever been, and that the answer was not the kind he could publish. The answer was something like, the borders are much further out than we thought. The communicating world includes things that do not have words and never needed them, and were speaking long before words existed. The planet has its own conversation. The ocean and the sky are participants in it. The whales, with their ancient songs, are not sending messages into a silence. They are contributing to a dialogue that has no beginning and no end. And on the nights when the aurora came alive above the water and the humpback sang below, he felt, for the first time since he could remember, not overwhelmed by the world, but held inside it. It is a clear night in late February, and the aurora forecast has been predicting a significant event for 3 days. By the time the activity begins, Kenji is already on the shoreline. The rest of the team is on the vessel, running their instruments. He has his recorder, he has his coat and his boots, and the cold. The whales have been singing for 2 hours. He can hear it not through equipment directly. A low, felt presence through the soles of his feet, a vibration carried through stone from sea. Above him, the aurora does not arrive gradually. It arrives all at once, a vast cascade of green light that erupts across the full width of the sky and begins to move in long, slow, sweeping structures that cover the entire dome of the night from horizon to horizon. It is so large that it nearly takes his breath away. He stands very still. The whale song shifts. He has heard this sequence before, recorded it, modeled it, noted the moment in his data log the way you note something you don't yet have words for. It is a long descending phrase, followed by a period of what his instruments classify as silence, though it is not truly silent. The silence itself has texture, a resting frequency like a breath held between words. And then the ascent. The phrase rises, slowly in intervals he has spent weeks learning to recognize. And as it rises, the aurora above him does something he has never seen it do before. It contracts, all of it, simultaneously. Every band and curtain and rippling structure drawing inward toward the center of the sky, as if gathering itself. For 3 or 4 seconds, the display narrows to something almost concentrated. A single bright column of green directly overhead, impossibly vivid, casting clear color across the water and the snow and the rock and his own upturned face. And then it releases, outward in every direction at once. A slow explosion of light that covers the sky from edge to edge, green becoming gold at the margins, violet threading through, the light so bright and so close and so alive that he feels them rather than sees them. A warm resonance he has no physiological explanation for. He does not need one. He does not reach for his recorder. He stands in the light and listens to the water and lets the sky do what it is doing without needing to name it. He will write about this night eventually. He will write about all of it, the data, the model, the correlation analysis, the gradual dismantling of assumptions he had carried for years without examining. He will write about what it felt like to stand at the edge of the Atlantic and hear the planet in conversation with itself. He will publish what can be published and hold the rest close. What he will not be able to fully explain, not in any paper, not in any language he has access to, is what it felt like to be present for it, to have spent 15 years studying communication and then arrive, finally, at the edge of something that communicated in frequencies he could feel but not decode, and find that this was not a failure, but an arrival. The whales know something that takes human beings a very long time to learn, if they learn at all. That to be part of the conversation, you do not need to understand it. You only need to be present. You only need to listen. Above him, the lights move on, slowly, beautifully, in no hurry at all. Below, somewhere in the cold, dark water, the humpbacks are still singing. The sky is still answering. Thank you for being here. We hope this story carried you somewhere worth going. We'd love to know what you thought. Did the world unfold the way you imagined it? Or does your version of the story look a little different? Tell us in the comments, because we genuinely want to hear. And if Dreamstate Stories is something you'd like more of, subscribing and sharing means everything to a small channel. It's the simplest way to help these stories find the people who need them. Until next time, keep dreaming.